Question 1. The assessment process reveals that the Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, is implementing a new community policing initiative aimed at strengthening relationships with local residents and improving officer safety through enhanced neighborhood engagement. As an officer on patrol in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, how should you best approach the integration of this new initiative into your daily duties? Option A. Express your personal reservations about the initiative's potential effectiveness to community members you encounter during your patrols. Option B. Independently interpret the initiative's goals and modify your patrol tactics based on your personal understanding of community needs without consulting supervisors. Option C. Proactively seek clarification and guidance from your immediate supervisor regarding the initiative's objectives, your specific role, and any updated departmental policies or procedures. Option D. Continue with your existing patrol methods, considering the new initiative a low priority that does not significantly impact your immediate operational responsibilities. The correct answer is C. Proactively seek clarification and guidance from your immediate supervisor regarding the initiative's objectives, your specific role, and any updated departmental policies or procedures. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a critical juncture for a Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officer regarding the impact of a new community policing initiative on public trust and officer safety. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the officer to balance the immediate operational realities of their daily duties with the broader, long-term goals of community engagement and safety, all within the specific legal and ethical framework governing the PPD in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Misjudgments can lead to eroded community relations, decreased effectiveness, and potential disciplinary action. The best approach involves proactively seeking clarification and guidance from supervisors regarding the implementation of the new initiative. This approach is correct because it aligns with the PPD's established chain of command and internal communication protocols. By consulting with superiors, the officer ensures they understand the initiative's objectives, their specific role, and any updated departmental policies or procedures. This proactive step demonstrates a commitment to professional development, adherence to departmental directives, and a responsible approach to integrating new strategies, thereby upholding the PPD's commitment to effective and ethical law enforcement, as outlined in the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter and relevant PPD general orders. This also ensures that any actions taken are in full compliance with Pennsylvania law and PPD policy regarding community interaction and officer conduct. An incorrect approach would be to independently interpret the initiative's goals and modify patrol tactics without consulting supervisors. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established authority and can lead to inconsistent application of policy, potentially undermining the initiative's intended impact and creating confusion among fellow officers. It also risks deviating from PPD directives and Pennsylvania state laws governing police conduct, potentially leading to unintended negative consequences for community relations or officer safety. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the initiative as a low priority and continue with existing patrol methods without any attempt to understand or integrate its principles. This is professionally unacceptable, as it demonstrates a lack of engagement with departmental directives and a disregard for efforts to improve community relations and officer safety. Such an attitude can foster cynicism within the department and alienate the community the PPD serves, directly contravening the PPD's mission and ethical obligations. A further incorrect approach would be to openly express skepticism about the initiative's effectiveness to community members during routine interactions. This is professionally unacceptable because it undermines public confidence in the PPD and its leadership. Officers are representatives of the department, and their public statements should reflect departmental policy and a commitment to its goals, not personal doubts, which can be addressed through internal channels. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding departmental directives, seeking clarification from supervisors when necessary, and acting in accordance with established policies and legal mandates. This involves a commitment to continuous learning, open communication, and a proactive approach to implementing changes that enhance public safety and community trust within the specific context of the Philadelphia Police Department and Pennsylvania law. Question 2. Analysis of a Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, Officer's response to a call regarding suspicious activity at a local convenience store. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action to ensure both public safety and adherence to constitutional rights? Option A. Search the individual based solely on a hunch or a vague tip received from an anonymous caller without any corroborating evidence. Option B. Question the individual extensively without informing them of their rights, assuming they are not yet in custody. Option C. Delay the investigation indefinitely to obtain a warrant, even when immediate circumstances suggest probable cause and a risk of evidence destruction. Option D. Conduct a thorough, on-the-spot assessment to establish probable cause based on observable facts and circumstances before initiating any search. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough, on-the-spot assessment to establish probable cause based on observable facts and circumstances before initiating any search. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Philadelphia Police Department (PPD) officer because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual. The officer must assess the situation to determine if probable cause exists for a search, while also considering the potential for evidence destruction or officer safety. Failure to adhere to proper legal standards can lead to the suppression of evidence and undermine public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer conducting a thorough, on-the-spot assessment to establish probable cause based on observable facts and circumstances. This means gathering specific, articulable reasons that would lead a reasonable person to believe that crime has been committed or that evidence of a crime is present. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and requires probable cause for warrantless searches. PPD policy in Pennsylvania law mandate that officers have probable cause before conducting a search, ensuring that individual liberties are respected while allowing for effective law enforcement. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that involves searching the individual based solely on a hunch or a vague tip without any corroborating evidence is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the probable cause standard and violates constitutional protections against unreasonable searches. Such an action could lead to civil liability for the officer and the department, and any evidence obtained would likely be inadmissible in court. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation indefinitely to obtain a warrant, even when immediate circumstances suggest probable cause and a risk of evidence destruction. While warrants are preferred, exigent circumstances, such as the imminent destruction of evidence or danger to officers, can justify a warrantless search if probable cause exists. Failing to act when legally permissible to do so could allow a suspect to escape or evidence to disappear, hindering the investigation. Finally, an approach that involves questioning the individual extensively without informing them of their rights, particularly if they are in custody, is also professionally unacceptable. While initial questioning may be permissible, if the situation escalates to an arrest or custodial interrogation, the officer must Mirandize the individual. Failure to do so, as per Miranda v. Arizona, can render any statements made inadmissible. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves 1. Situational awareness, continuously assessing the environment and the behavior of individuals involved. 2. Legal standards, understanding and applying the specific legal requirements for searches, seizures, and arrests, particularly the probable cause standard and the concept of exigent circumstances. 3. Policy adherence, familiarizing oneself with and strictly following the Philadelphia Police Department's policies and procedures. 4. Documentation, meticulously documenting all observations, actions, and justifications for any enforcement action taken. This systematic approach ensures that actions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and contribute to effective and just policing. Question 3. The review process indicates a citizen complaint has been filed alleging excessive force by a Philadelphia Police Department (PPD) officer during an arrest. The officer involved has submitted their initial report stating their actions were justified. What is the most appropriate next step for the PPD Internal Affairs Division to take in assessing this incident? Option A. Prioritize the officer's defense and seek to corroborate their account without independently verifying all claims or considering alternative perspectives. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive and impartial investigation, gathering all available evidence including body-worn camera footage, witness statements, and the officer's full report to determine if the use of force was consistent with PPD policy and Pennsylvania law. Option C. Close the investigation immediately, accepting the officer's report as sufficient justification for the use of force, given their statement of justification. Option D. Focus the investigation primarily on the arrestee's criminal history to establish a pattern of behavior that might have necessitated the officer's actions. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive and impartial investigation, gathering all available evidence including body-worn camera footage, witness statements, and the officer's full report, to determine if the use of force was consistent with PPD policy and Pennsylvania law. Explanation: the review process indicates a potential violation of departmental policy and state law regarding the use of force by Philadelphia Police Department, PPD officers. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an immediate and objective assessment of a rapidly evolving situation, balancing the need for public safety with the constitutional rights of individuals. The officer's actions must be justifiable under Pennsylvania law and PPD policy, which emphasize proportionality and necessity. The best approach involves a thorough, objective, and timely review of all available evidence, including witness statements, body-worn camera footage, and the officer's report, to determine if the use of force was consistent with PPD policy and Pennsylvania law. This approach is correct because it adheres to the principles of due process and accountability. PPD policy, as guided by Pennsylvania statutes such as the Crimes Code, 18 PA. C.S. Section 508, permits the use of force only when necessary and to the extent that the officer reasonably believes is required to effect a lawful arrest, prevent escape, or defend themselves or others. A comprehensive review ensures that these legal and policy standards are met, protecting both the public and the integrity of the department. An approach that prematurely dismisses the complaint based solely on the officer's initial statement fails to uphold the departmental duty to investigate thoroughly. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound, as it bypasses the requirement for independent verification and can lead to a miscarriage of justice if the officer's account is inaccurate or incomplete. Furthermore, an approach that focuses solely on the suspect's prior record, rather than the specific circumstances of the incident, is a violation of due process and PPD policy. The legality and appropriateness of force are judged by the facts and circumstances known to the officer at the time of the incident, not by the suspect's past behavior. Finally, an approach that prioritizes protecting the officer from scrutiny above all else, without a fair and impartial investigation, undermines public trust and violates the ethical obligations of law enforcement to serve and protect all members of the community. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a commitment to impartiality. This involves gathering all relevant facts, considering all perspectives, and applying established policies and legal standards without bias. When evaluating the use of force, officers and supervisors must ask, was the force used objectively reasonable given the totality of the circumstances confronting the officer at that moment? This framework ensures that decisions are grounded in evidence, law, and ethical principles, promoting accountability and maintaining public confidence. Question 4. Performance analysis shows that Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officers frequently encounter situations where an individual involved in a developing incident requires immediate medical attention. In such a scenario, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for an officer responding to a reported disturbance in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where one individual is visibly injured and appears to be losing consciousness? Option A. Focus solely on gathering statements from any available witnesses at the scene while waiting for medical personnel to arrive and assess the injured individual. Option B. Delay any significant action, including requesting medical assistance, until a supervisor arrives on the scene to provide direct orders on how to proceed. Option C. Immediately secure the scene, request emergency medical services, and begin a preliminary assessment of the situation without engaging in direct questioning about the incident, until the individual is medically stable and Miranda warnings can be properly administered. Option D. Initiate immediate, detailed questioning about the incident to gather crucial information before the individual's condition deteriorates further or they lose consciousness. The correct answer is C. Immediately secure the scene, request emergency medical services, and begin a preliminary assessment of the situation without engaging in direct questioning about the incident, until the individual is medically stable and Miranda warnings can be properly administered. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect an individual's rights and ensure the integrity of evidence. The officer must act swiftly, but also deliberately, considering the potential consequences of their actions on the investigation and the individual's due process. The pressure of a developing situation can lead to hasty decisions that compromise these critical principles. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the scene and requesting appropriate medical assistance for the injured individual, while simultaneously initiating a preliminary assessment of the situation without intrusive questioning. This approach is correct because it prioritizes life-saving measures and preserves the integrity of the scene for subsequent investigation. Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, guidelines in Pennsylvania law emphasize the importance of rendering aid and securing evidence. By delaying direct questioning until the individual is medically stable and Miranda warnings can be properly administered, the officer upholds the individual's constitutional rights against self-incrimination, as guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and further elaborated in Pennsylvania case law. This ensures any statements obtained are admissible, and the investigation proceeds ethically and legally. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating immediate, detailed questioning about the incident before medical aid is rendered and before Miranda warnings are given is professionally unacceptable. This approach violates the individual's Fifth Amendment rights by potentially coercing a statement under duress or without full understanding of their rights. It also risks obtaining unreliable information due to the individual's medical condition. Such actions could lead to the suppression of evidence and disciplinary action against the officer. Focusing solely on gathering witness statements from bystanders while neglecting the injured individual's immediate medical needs and rights is also professionally unacceptable. While witness accounts are valuable, the primary duty of care extends to the injured party. Delaying medical attention and failing to address the individual's rights can have severe legal and ethical repercussions, including potential charges of neglect or misconduct. Waiting for a supervisor to arrive and direct all actions, even for basic steps like requesting medical assistance, is professionally unacceptable in an emergency situation. While chain of command is important, officers are trained and empowered to make immediate decisions regarding life safety and scene preservation. Unnecessary delays in critical moments can jeopardize the individual's well-being and the integrity of the investigation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to decision-making in such situations. First, prioritize immediate safety and well-being, medical aid. Second, secure the scene to preserve evidence. Third, assess the situation and identify immediate investigative needs. Fourth, ensure all legal and constitutional rights are respected before engaging in formal questioning. This framework ensures that actions are both effective and ethically sound, adhering to PPD policies and Pennsylvania law. Question 5. The performance metrics show a significant increase in average response times for domestic disturbance calls across several precincts in Philadelphia over the past quarter. Which of the following approaches would be most effective in addressing this trend? Option A. Reallocate patrol officers from less busy precincts to those experiencing the longest response times without a detailed analysis of call volume and geographical challenges. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of dispatch protocols, officer deployment patterns, and patrol zone efficiency to identify systemic causes for the increased response times. Option C. Implement mandatory overtime for all patrol officers to increase on-duty presence and reduce response times. Option D. Focus disciplinary actions on individual officers whose response times fall below the departmental average. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of dispatch protocols, officer deployment patterns, and patrol zone efficiency to identify systemic causes for the increased response times. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in response times for domestic disturbance calls within the Philadelphia Police Department, PPD. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the PPD's ability to fulfill its core mission. Officers are expected to respond promptly to emergencies and delays can have severe consequences for victims and the community. Careful judgment is required to identify the root cause of the delays and implement effective solutions that align with PPD policies and ethical obligations. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of dispatch protocols and officer deployment strategies. This includes analyzing call prioritization, geographical patrol zones, and potential staffing shortages during peak hours. The goal is to identify systemic inefficiencies that are contributing to increased response times. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the performance metrics by seeking to understand the underlying operational issues. It aligns with the PPD's commitment to efficient service delivery and its ethical duty to protect and serve the citizens of Philadelphia by ensuring timely assistance during critical situations. This proactive, data-driven analysis is essential for informed decision-making and resource allocation. An approach that focuses solely on individual officer performance without considering systemic factors is incorrect. This fails to acknowledge that response times are influenced by a multitude of operational elements beyond an individual officer's control, such as dispatch efficiency and patrol area coverage. Blaming individual officers without a thorough investigation into the system is ethically problematic and unlikely to resolve the core issue. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the performance metrics as statistical anomalies without further investigation. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and a failure to address potential problems that could jeopardize public safety. Ignoring data that indicates a decline in service quality is professionally irresponsible and undermines the PPD's commitment to continuous improvement. Finally, an approach that proposes immediate, drastic changes to patrol routes without data-driven analysis is also flawed. Such actions could inadvertently worsen response times in other areas or create new inefficiencies. Effective solutions must be based on a clear understanding of the problem, derived from a thorough impact assessment of current operations. Professionals should approach such situations by first acknowledging the data presented. They should then initiate a systematic review process, gathering input from relevant stakeholders, dispatchers, patrol officers, supervisors. This review should focus on identifying operational bottlenecks and evaluating the effectiveness of current protocols. Based on this analysis, evidence-based solutions can be developed and implemented, with ongoing monitoring to ensure their effectiveness. Question 6. Investigation of a potential data breach within the Philadelphia Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. A PPD officer discovers a series of encrypted digital files on a seized device. To assess the potential impact of this breach, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the officer to take in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania? Option A. Proceed with a broad analysis of all data on the seized device, assuming the worst-case scenario for impact, without specific guidance on the encrypted files. Option B. Attempt to decrypt and analyze the files independently using readily available decryption tools to quickly understand the scope of the breach. Option C. Immediately consult with the PPD's Digital Forensics Unit and their direct supervisor to determine the proper protocol for accessing, analyzing, and assessing the impact of the encrypted files, ensuring all actions align with PPD policy and Pennsylvania law. Option D. Share the existence of the encrypted files and preliminary suspicions with other officers not directly involved in the investigation to gather informal opinions. The correct answer is C. Immediately consult with the PPD's Digital Forensics Unit and their direct supervisor to determine the proper protocol for accessing, analyzing, and assessing the impact of the encrypted files, ensuring all actions align with PPD policy and Pennsylvania law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officer due to the sensitive nature of the information involved and the potential for misuse or unauthorized disclosure. The officer must balance the need for thorough investigation with the imperative to protect individual privacy and adhere to departmental policies and Pennsylvania law regarding evidence handling and information dissemination. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the impact assessment is conducted ethically and legally, avoiding any actions that could compromise the investigation or violate civil liberties. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic and authorized approach to impact assessment. This includes consulting with supervisors and the relevant PPD unit responsible for data privacy and digital forensics. This approach is correct because it ensures that the assessment is conducted within the established legal and departmental framework, minimizing the risk of unauthorized access, data breaches, or improper use of information. Pennsylvania law, such as the Pennsylvania Wiretap Act and the Pennsylvania Uniform Construction Code, which may contain provisions related to data privacy in certain contexts, along with PPD internal policies on evidence handling and information security, mandate such a structured process. This ensures accountability and adherence to due process. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately accessing and analyzing all digital devices without proper authorization or supervision. This fails to comply with PPD protocols for handling digital evidence and potentially violates individuals' rights to privacy as protected under Pennsylvania law. Bypasses necessary checks and balances, increasing the risk of evidence contamination or inadmissible evidence. Another incorrect approach is to share preliminary findings with unauthorized personnel or the public before a formal assessment is complete and approved. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and could jeopardize the integrity of the investigation, potentially tipping off suspects or compromising witness safety. PPD policies strictly govern the dissemination of investigative information. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on personal judgment and intuition to determine the scope and impact of the data without consulting relevant PPD resources or legal counsel. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the complex legal and ethical considerations surrounding digital evidence and impact assessment, potentially leading to significant procedural errors and legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols, legal mandates, and ethical guidelines. This involves seeking guidance from superiors, consulting relevant departmental policies and state laws, and collaborating with specialized units when dealing with sensitive information or complex investigative procedures. A proactive approach to understanding potential impacts and risks, coupled with a commitment to transparency and accountability within authorized channels, is crucial for effective and lawful impact assessment. Question 7. Comparative studies suggest that the effectiveness of police interventions in preventing immediate criminal activity is significantly influenced by the officer's ability to accurately assess and articulate the grounds for their actions. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, if a PPD officer observes an individual exhibiting behavior that raises suspicion of potential criminal involvement, what is the most legally and ethically sound approach to justify a subsequent search of that individual? Option A. Meticulously document all observable facts and articulable circumstances that, when viewed collectively, would lead a reasonable person to believe that evidence of a crime is present or has been committed. Option B. Conduct a search based on a general feeling or intuition that the individual is likely involved in criminal activity, without specific observable facts. Option C. Justify the search solely on the basis of the individual being in a neighborhood known for higher crime rates. Option D. Proceed with a search if the individual appears nervous or attempts to avoid eye contact, as these are indicators of guilt. The correct answer is A. Meticulously document all observable facts and articulable circumstances that, when viewed collectively, would lead a reasonable person to believe that evidence of a crime is present or has been committed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officer due to the inherent tension between immediate public safety concerns and the procedural rights of individuals. The officer must balance the need to act swiftly to prevent potential harm with the obligation to conduct a search and seizure in a manner that is legally sound and respects constitutional protections. Failure to do so could result in the suppression of evidence, internal disciplinary action, and civil liability. Careful judgment is required to assess the totality of circumstances and determine if probable cause exists for a lawful search. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer meticulously documenting all observations and articulable facts that led to the belief that a crime had been committed or was about to be committed. This includes details about the suspect's behavior, the environment, and any other information that, when taken together, would lead a reasonable person to believe that evidence of a crime would be found. This approach aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures and requires probable cause for a warrant or a lawful exception to the warrant requirement. By focusing on observable facts and logical inferences, the officer builds a legally defensible justification for their actions, adhering to PPD policy and state law regarding search and seizure. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer relying on a vague feeling or hunch that the individual might be involved in criminal activity without specific, observable facts to support this suspicion. This fails to meet the constitutional standard of probable cause or even reasonable suspicion, which requires more than a mere hunch. Such an approach violates Fourth Amendment protections and PPD guidelines that mandate objective justification for stops and searches. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a search based solely on the individual's presence in a high-crime area, without any independent indicators of wrongdoing. While location can be a factor in the totality of circumstances, it is insufficient on its own to establish probable cause or reasonable suspicion. This approach risks profiling and discriminatory practices, which are contrary to ethical policing and PPD directives. A third incorrect approach is to justify the search based on the individual's nervousness or evasive behavior alone, without accompanying objective facts suggesting criminal activity. While nervousness can be a component of reasonable suspicion, it is not determinative and can be exhibited by innocent individuals under police interaction. Relying solely on this subjective observation without corroborating evidence is legally insufficient and ethically problematic. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective, articulable facts. When faced with a situation requiring a potential search, an officer should ask, what specific, observable facts do I have that, when considered together, would lead a reasonable person to believe that evidence of a crime is present or about to be committed? This framework encourages a systematic assessment of the situation, grounding actions in constitutional requirements and departmental policy, thereby promoting lawful and ethical policing. Question 8. The investigation demonstrates that Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officers observed suspicious activity consistent with drug distribution at private residence. While observing the property, officers detected a strong odor of marijuana emanating from within. Considering the potential for evidence destruction, what is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the PPD officers to take? Option A. Immediately seek a search warrant from a judge based on the observed activity and the detected odor of marijuana. Option B. Wait outside the residence for the occupants to exit before attempting to engage them in conversation. Option C. Detain any individuals who exit the residence and question them about the activity inside. Option D. Enter the residence without a warrant to prevent the potential destruction of evidence. The correct answer is A. Immediately seek a search warrant from a judge based on the observed activity and the detected odor of marijuana. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a common challenge faced by Philadelphia Police Department, PPD officers, balancing the need for swift action with the constitutional rights of individuals. This scenario requires careful judgment to ensure that evidence is gathered legally and ethically, thereby maintaining the integrity of the investigation and the admissibility of any findings in court. The core tension lies in the potential for exigent circumstances to justify immediate entry versus the fundamental right to privacy and protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The best professional practice involves securing a warrant based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. By obtaining a warrant, officers demonstrate to a neutral magistrate that sufficient probable cause exists to believe that evidence of a crime will be found at the location. This process safeguards individual liberties and ensures that police actions are judicially sanctioned, thereby strengthening the case against any challenges to the evidence's admissibility. The PPD's internal policies and training emphasize this due process, aligning with established legal precedent. Acting without a warrant, even with a strong suspicion, presents significant regulatory and ethical failures. One incorrect approach involves entering the residence immediately based solely on the smell of marijuana. This fails to establish probable cause for a search warrant and relies on a subjective sensory observation that, while potentially indicative, may not meet the threshold for exigent circumstances or probable cause for a full search and seizure under Pennsylvania law and U.S. constitutional standards. Another incorrect approach is to wait for the suspect to exit the residence before attempting to question them. While this avoids an immediate warrantless entry, it risks the destruction of evidence if the suspect is alerted to the police presence and has the opportunity to dispose of contraband within the home. This passive approach may also be seen as a failure to diligently pursue investigative leads when probable cause for a warrant might be developing. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional compliance and investigative thoroughness. This involves a systematic assessment of the situation. First, determining if probable cause exists for a warrant. If probable cause is established, the next step is to evaluate whether exigent circumstances truly exist that would justify immediate entry without a warrant, e.g., imminent destruction of evidence, immediate danger to life. If neither probable cause for a warrant nor exigent circumstances are present, officers should explore less intrusive investigative methods or continue gathering information to build a stronger case for a warrant. This structured approach ensures that actions are legally sound and ethically defensible, protecting both the public and the integrity of the justice system. Question 9. Assessment of ethical conduct for a Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officer who, while on duty, learns of significant financial distress affecting a local business they are familiar with, and subsequently considers how this information might impact their personal financial decisions or those of their associates in Pennsylvania. Option A. Take no action, assuming that personal financial considerations unrelated to direct police action do not require reporting or intervention. Option B. Advise a close friend to invest in the business, suggesting they have a hunch about its potential turnaround based on their familiarity with the situation. Option C. Discreetly invest in the struggling business, believing their knowledge of its difficulties could lead to a profitable future opportunity. Option D. Immediately report the information and the potential conflict of interest to their direct supervisor and await further guidance on how to proceed, ensuring no personal or indirect financial advantage is sought. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the information and the potential conflict of interest to their direct supervisor and await further guidance on how to proceed, ensuring no personal or indirect financial advantage is sought. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the potential misuse of information obtained during official duties. Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officer is privy to sensitive details about a local business's financial struggles. The challenge lies in balancing the officer's personal financial interests with their sworn duty to uphold the law and maintain public trust. The PPD operates under strict ethical guidelines and departmental regulations designed to prevent conflicts of interest and ensure impartiality. Any action that could be perceived as leveraging official knowledge for personal gain, even indirectly, erodes public confidence and can lead to disciplinary action, including termination and potential criminal charges. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately disengaging from any potential conflict of interest and reporting the situation to a supervisor. This approach prioritizes transparency and adherence to PPD's Code of Conduct and Pennsylvania law regarding public officials' conduct. Specifically, officers are bound by rules of conduct that prohibit using their position or information gained through their position for personal benefit or the benefit of others. By reporting the situation, the officer allows for proper oversight and ensures that no impropriety occurs. This aligns with the ethical imperative to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, a cornerstone of law enforcement integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves discreetly investing in the struggling business after learning of its financial difficulties. This is professionally unacceptable because it directly leverages information gained through official duties for personal financial gain, creating a clear conflict of interest. It violates PPD regulations, prohibiting officers from engaging in business dealings that could be influenced by their official capacity or information obtained thereby. Another incorrect approach is to advise a close friend or family member to invest in the business, citing the officer's insider knowledge. This is also professionally unacceptable. While not a direct personal investment, it constitutes an indirect use of official information for the benefit of another, which is equally prohibited. This action breaches the trust placed in the officer and could lead to accusations of favoritism or insider trading, undermining the PPD's reputation. A final incorrect approach is to ignore the information and take no action, assuming it does not directly impact the officer. This is professionally unacceptable because it demonstrates a lack of ethical awareness and a failure to proactively address a potential conflict of interest. While not an active misuse, it represents a passive acceptance of a situation that could compromise the integrity of the department and the officer's duty. PPD officers are expected to act with integrity and to report any circumstances that could lead to a conflict of interest. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must adopt a proactive and transparent approach to potential conflicts of interest. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying any situation where personal interests might conflict with official duties or where information gained in an official capacity could be used for personal or third-party benefit. 2. Immediately ceasing any action that could create or exacerbate the conflict. 3. Reporting the situation to a supervisor or designated ethics officer, providing all relevant details. 4. Following departmental guidance and legal requirements for resolving the conflict, which may include recusal from certain duties or divestment of interests. The guiding principle is always to prioritize public trust, departmental integrity, and adherence to legal and ethical standards above personal gain. Question 10. Cost-benefit analysis shows that the Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, has a limited budget for new crime prevention initiatives in the upcoming fiscal year. Officer Miller has proposed two distinct programs. Program A, which involves increasing uniformed foot patrols in high-crime districts, estimated to cost $500,000 annually, and projected to reduce reported burglaries by 15% in those districts. Program B, which focuses on establishing community liaison officers and neighborhood watch programs, estimated to cost $400,000 annually, and projected to increase citizen reporting of suspicious activity by 25%, potentially leading to a 10% reduction in overall crime. If the PPD's primary objective is to achieve the greatest reduction in overall crime per dollar spent, which program should be prioritized, and what is the calculated crime reduction efficiency for each? Option A. Prioritize Program B, as it offers a higher crime reduction efficiency of 0.025% per dollar spent compared to Program A's efficiency of 0.03% per dollar spent. Option B. Prioritize Program A, as it offers a higher crime reduction efficiency of 0.03% per dollar spent compared to Program B's efficiency of 0.025% per dollar spent. Option C. Prioritize Program B, as it has a lower overall cost and a higher percentage increase in citizen reporting, which indirectly leads to greater crime reduction. Option D. Prioritize Program A, as the direct reduction in a specific crime category, burglaries, is more impactful than the indirect reduction from increased reporting. The correct answer is A. Prioritize Program B, as it offers a higher crime reduction efficiency of 0.025% per dollar spent compared to Program A's efficiency of 0.03% per dollar spent. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officers, allocating limited resources for crime prevention initiatives. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for visible patrols in high-crime areas with the long-term benefits of community engagement programs, all within a fixed budget. This requires a data-driven, cost-benefit approach to ensure the most effective use of taxpayer money and officer time to maximize public safety. The best approach involves a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis that quantifies the expected outcomes of each initiative against its associated costs. This means estimating the reduction in crime rates, improvement in community relations, and potential for long-term crime deterrence for each proposed program. For example, a program focused on increased foot patrols in a specific precinct might be analyzed by estimating the number of arrests or stops that could lead to crime reduction, weighed against the overtime costs and officer hours. Simultaneously, a community outreach program could be assessed by its potential to increase citizen reporting of crimes, improve trust, and foster a sense of shared responsibility for safety, measured against the costs of staffing, materials, and event organization. This data-driven method aligns with the PPD's mandate to efficiently and effectively serve the citizens of Philadelphia by prioritizing initiatives that yield the greatest return on investment in terms of public safety and community well-being, as guided by departmental policies on resource allocation and performance metrics. An approach that solely prioritizes initiatives with the lowest immediate financial outlay without considering their potential impact on crime reduction or community trust is flawed. This could lead to underfunding programs that, while initially more expensive, offer significant long-term benefits in crime prevention and community relations. For instance, neglecting a community policing initiative because it requires more upfront investment in training and events, in favor of simply increasing overtime for patrols, might lead to short-term visibility but fail to address the root causes of crime or build the necessary trust for sustained public safety improvements. Another incorrect approach is to allocate funds based on anecdotal evidence or personal preferences of supervisors rather than objective data. This can lead to inefficient resource distribution, where popular but less effective programs receive funding, while more impactful initiatives are overlooked. Such a method disregards the PPD's responsibility to use public funds judiciously and ethically, and it fails to demonstrate accountability to the citizens it serves. Finally, an approach that focuses exclusively on quantifiable crime statistics without considering qualitative factors like community perception and trust is incomplete. While crime reduction is paramount, fostering positive relationships with the community is crucial for intelligence gathering, crime prevention, and overall public safety. Ignoring this aspect can undermine long-term effectiveness. The professional decision-making process for such situations should involve 1. Clearly defining the objectives of the resource allocation, e.g., crime reduction, community engagement, officer safety. 2. Gathering relevant data on crime trends, community needs, and the potential impact and costs of various initiatives. 3. Conducting a thorough cost-benefit analysis for each viable option. 4. Prioritizing initiatives that offer the best balance of effectiveness, efficiency, and alignment with departmental goals and ethical obligations. And 5. Establishing mechanisms for ongoing evaluation and adjustment of resource allocation based on performance data. Question 11. Regulatory review indicates that a Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officer receives a radio dispatch detailing a citizen's report of an individual matching a specific description, allegedly carrying a concealed object resembling a firearm and exhibiting nervous behavior in a public park known for recent incidents of violence. Upon arriving at the scene, the officer observes an individual fitting the description, who appears agitated and is repeatedly looking around. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take, adhering to PPD policy and Pennsylvania law regarding stops and searches? Option A. Initiate a brief investigatory stop to question the individual, and if reasonable suspicion of being armed and dangerous develops, conduct a limited pat-down for weapons. Option B. Conduct a full search of the individual for contraband and weapons without further justification. Option C. Immediately arrest the individual based on the citizen's report and the observed nervous behavior. Option D. Disregard the citizen's report and the individual's behavior and continue patrolling the area. The correct answer is A. Initiate a brief investigatory stop to question the individual, and if reasonable suspicion of being armed and dangerous develops, conduct a limited pat-down for weapons. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Philadelphia Police Department, PPD officers, balancing the need for immediate public safety with the constitutional rights of individuals. The officer must make a rapid assessment of a potentially volatile situation, considering the information provided by a concerned citizen against the legal standards for initiating a stop. The professional challenge lies in acting decisively to prevent harm without infringing upon civil liberties, which requires a nuanced understanding of probable cause and reasonable suspicion, as defined by Pennsylvania law and U.S. constitutional precedent. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves the officer initiating a brief, investigatory stop based on the citizen's detailed and specific observations, which, when combined with the officer's own observations, could establish reasonable suspicion. This approach aligns with the principles established in Terry v. Ohio and its progeny, as interpreted under Pennsylvania law. Reasonable suspicion requires more than a mere hunch. Demands specific and articulable facts that, taken together with rational inferences from those facts, reasonably warrant an intrusion upon an individual's liberty. The citizen's report of person matching a description, carrying a concealed object that appears to be a firearm, and acting nervously in a high-crime area, if corroborated by the officer's observation of the individual exhibiting similar behavior or possessing a similar object, would likely meet this threshold. This allows for a limited pat-down for weapons if the officer has a reasonable belief the person is armed and dangerous. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that involves immediately arresting the individual based solely on the citizen's report, without any independent corroboration or further observation by the officer, would be legally flawed. Arrest requires probable cause, a higher standard than reasonable suspicion, meaning a fair probability that a crime has been committed and that the suspect committed it. The citizen's report alone, without more, does not meet this standard. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the citizen's report entirely and walk away. This would fail to address a potentially serious public safety concern and could be seen as dereliction of duty, especially if the citizen's information was credible and the officer's subsequent observations supported it. While officers must respect individual rights, they also have a duty to investigate credible threats to public safety. Finally, an approach that involves a full search of the individual without any reasonable suspicion of criminal activity or a reasonable belief that the person is armed and dangerous would violate the Fourth Amendment and Pennsylvania law. A search beyond a limited pat-down for weapons is not permissible under Terry v. Ohio unless probable cause for an arrest exists. Professional reasoning, PPD officers should employ a tiered approach to such encounters. First, they must listen to and assess the credibility of citizen reports, noting the specificity of the information provided. Second, they should attempt to corroborate the information through their own observations, looking for behaviors or characteristics that align with the report. Third, based on the totality of the circumstances, they must determine if reasonable suspicion exists to justify an investigatory stop, and if applicable, a pat-down for weapons. If probable cause develops, an arrest may be warranted. This systematic evaluation ensures that actions are both legally sound and professionally responsible, prioritizing both public safety and individual liberties. Question 12. Consider a scenario where a Philadelphia Police Department (PPD) officer, while on routine patrol, observes through an open window of a residential property what appears to be a significant quantity of illegal narcotics clearly visible on a table inside. The officer has no warrant, and there are no immediate signs of danger or imminent destruction of evidence. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Immediately enter the residence through the open window to seize the suspected narcotics, as the observation provides probable cause for arrest and seizure. Option B. Attempt to personally collect the suspected narcotics through the open window to preserve the evidence before it can be moved or destroyed. Option C. Disregard the observation and continue the patrol, as entering the property without a warrant would be a violation of constitutional rights. Option D. Secure the perimeter of the property to prevent any tampering with potential evidence, and immediately contact the Detective Bureau or Narcotics Unit to respond and handle the situation according to proper procedure. The correct answer is D. Secure the perimeter of the property to prevent any tampering with potential evidence, and immediately contact the Detective Bureau or Narcotics Unit to respond and handle the situation according to proper procedure. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Philadelphia Police Department (PPD) officer due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action in a potential emergency and the requirement to adhere to established departmental procedures and legal guidelines regarding the use of force and evidence preservation. Misjudging the situation or acting impulsively could lead to compromised evidence, wrongful arrest, or excessive force, all of which carry significant legal and ethical ramifications for the officer and the department. The officer must balance immediate perceived threats with the long-term integrity of a potential criminal investigation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and procedural approach. This means the officer should immediately assess the situation for immediate threats to life or safety, and if none are present, secure the scene and request appropriate specialized units, such as detectives or evidence technicians, to handle the collection and processing of any potential evidence. This approach is correct because it prioritizes both officer and public safety, while ensuring that any evidence is collected in a manner that maintains its admissibility in court, adhering to the principles of due process and the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as well as PPD's own standard operating procedures. SOP. Concerning evidence handling and search and seizure. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately entering the premises without a warrant or exigent circumstances to seize the suspected contraband. This violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Without probable cause and a warrant, or a clearly defined exigent circumstance, like imminent destruction of evidence or immediate danger, such an entry and seizure would be unlawful, rendering any seized evidence inadmissible in court under the exclusionary rule. Another incorrect approach is to simply observe the situation from a distance and leave without taking any action, even if there is a strong indication of criminal activity. While this avoids an unlawful entry, it could be seen as a dereliction of duty if the officer has reasonable suspicion or probable cause to believe a crime is being committed and has the opportunity to act lawfully. This could also lead to the loss of an opportunity to gather evidence or prevent further criminal activity. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to collect the evidence personally without proper training or equipment, potentially contaminating or destroying its integrity. This disregards PPD's SOPs for evidence handling, which mandate that only trained personnel should collect and preserve evidence to maintain its chain of custody and prevent contamination, thereby jeopardizing its admissibility in court. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal statutes and departmental policies while ensuring public safety. This involves a continuous assessment of the situation, identifying potential legal constraints and procedural requirements, and selecting the course of action that best balances these factors. When faced with potential evidence, the default should always be to follow established protocols for evidence collection and preservation, involving specialized units when necessary, rather than improvising or acting solely on immediate assumptions. Question 13. Upon reviewing Philadelphia Police Department (PPD) guidelines on the use of force and officer conduct, an officer observes an individual in a public park exhibiting highly erratic behavior, shouting incoherently, and making vague gestures that could be interpreted as threatening. The individual is not currently in close proximity to any other civilians. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the PPD officer? Option A. Physically restrain the individual immediately to prevent any potential escalation. Option B. Approach the individual cautiously, using verbal commands to establish communication and assess the immediate threat level while maintaining a safe distance. Option C. Retreat to a safe distance and wait for backup without any attempt at verbal engagement. Option D. Immediately deploy a taser to incapacitate the individual due to their unpredictable behavior. The correct answer is B. Approach the individual cautiously, using verbal commands to establish communication and assess the immediate threat level while maintaining a safe distance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Philadelphia Police Department (PPD) officer regarding the appropriate use of force when encountering an individual exhibiting erratic behavior and making vague threats. The officer must balance the immediate need to ensure public safety and their own safety with the constitutional rights of the individual and departmental policy. Misjudging the level of threat or the appropriate response can lead to excessive force claims, civil liability, or failure to adequately protect the public. Careful judgment is required to de-escalate the situation if possible, while being prepared to act decisively if necessary. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a phased approach to de-escalation and threat assessment. This begins with verbal commands and attempts to establish communication, assessing the individual's intent and potential for harm from a safe distance. If the individual becomes physically aggressive or poses an immediate threat of serious bodily harm, the officer is justified in using the minimum force necessary to control the situation and ensure safety. This aligns with PPD's use of force policy, which emphasizes proportionality and the sanctity of life, requiring officers to use only the force that reasonably appears necessary to effect lawful objectives. The focus is on controlling the threat, not on punishment or excessive restraint. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately resorting to physical force without attempting verbal de-escalation or a thorough assessment of the threat. This fails to adhere to the PPD's emphasis on de-escalation as the primary strategy, and can be construed as excessive force if the situation did not warrant immediate physical intervention, disregards the individual's right to be free from unreasonable seizure and excessive force. Another incorrect approach is to disengage from the situation entirely, leaving the individual to potentially harm themselves or others. While officer safety is paramount, abandoning a potentially dangerous situation without attempting to mitigate the threat or call for backup is a dereliction of duty and fails to uphold the PPD's responsibility to protect the community. A third incorrect approach is to use lethal force when the individual's actions, while concerning, do not present an immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury to the officer or others. PPD policy, consistent with constitutional standards, reserves lethal force for situations where there is no other reasonable alternative to prevent imminent death or grievous harm. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation, threat assessment, and proportionality. This involves 1. Maintaining situational awareness and officer safety. 2. Attempting verbal communication and de-escalation techniques. 3. Continuously assessing the subject's behavior, intent, and the level of threat posed. 4. Applying the minimum level of force necessary to control the situation and achieve lawful objectives, in strict accordance with PPD policy and constitutional law. 5. Documenting all actions and observations thoroughly. Question 14. When evaluating a situation where a Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officer observes individuals exhibiting what appears to be furtive movements near a known drug trafficking area, what is the most appropriate course of action to uphold both public safety and individual rights? Option A. Initiate a verbal challenge and demand identification from the individuals, stating they are being detained for suspicious behavior. Option B. Immediately approach the individuals and conduct a pat-down search for weapons based on the suspicion of criminal activity. Option C. Ignore the individuals and continue patrolling, as the observed movements are not definitive proof of a crime. Option D. Continue to observe the individuals from a discreet distance, documenting their actions and the surrounding circumstances to gather more objective information before considering any form of interaction or intervention. The correct answer is D. Continue to observe the individuals from a discreet distance, documenting their actions and the surrounding circumstances to gather more objective information before considering any form of interaction or intervention. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for Philadelphia Police Department, PPD officers, balancing the need for swift action in a potential crime scene with the imperative to uphold constitutional rights and departmental policy. The professional challenge lies in the officer's immediate perception of a crime versus the legal standards for probable cause and the rights of individuals encountered. Careful judgment is required to avoid overstepping authority, which could lead to evidence suppression, civil liability, and damage to public trust. The best approach involves a measured response that prioritizes observation and information gathering while respecting individual liberties. This means refraining from immediate intrusive actions based solely on a subjective feeling or a brief observation of activity that could have innocent explanations. Instead, the officer should attempt to gather more objective information to establish probable cause or reasonable suspicion, depending on the nature of the suspected offense and the level of intrusion contemplated. This aligns with PPD policy regarding lawful stops, searches, and seizures, which are grounded in constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. The officer's duty is to investigate, but within the strict confines of the law and departmental guidelines. An incorrect approach would be to immediately detain or search the individuals based on a hunch or a vague observation of furtive movements. This fails to meet the legal threshold for reasonable suspicion or probable cause, violating the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and PPD policy. Such an action could be deemed an unlawful stop or search, leading to the exclusion of any evidence obtained. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation entirely, even if the observed activity appears suspicious. While avoiding unlawful actions is crucial, officers also have a duty to investigate potential criminal activity. A balanced approach is necessary. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the totality of the circumstances. This involves considering all available information, including the location, time of day, behavior of individuals, and any other relevant factors. The officer must then determine if the observed facts rise to the level of reasonable suspicion for a brief investigatory stop or probable cause for an arrest or search. If the threshold is not met, the officer should continue to observe or seek additional information without infringing on individual rights. If the threshold is met, the officer must act in accordance with PPD policy and constitutional law, documenting all actions and justifications thoroughly. Question 15. The analysis reveals that Officer Miller, while on patrol in a Philadelphia neighborhood known for recent reports of petty theft, observes an individual loitering near a parked car with its trunk slightly ajar. The individual glances nervously in Officer Miller's direction and quickly places a hand inside their jacket pocket. Considering the PPD's operational guidelines and Pennsylvania law, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Approach the individual casually, make small talk, and wait to see if they commit a more obvious offense before taking any action. Option B. Secure the immediate area, request backup, and initiate a lawful stop and frisk based on reasonable suspicion that the individual may be armed and involved in criminal activity. Option C. Immediately detain the individual and conduct a full search of their person and the vehicle's trunk, assuming they are involved in the recent thefts. Option D. Ignore the individual and continue the patrol, as the observed behavior does not definitively indicate a crime is being committed. The correct answer is B. Secure the immediate area, request backup, and initiate a lawful stop and frisk based on reasonable suspicion that the individual may be armed and involved in criminal activity. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between immediate public safety concerns and the strict adherence to procedural justice and individual rights. Officer Miller faces a situation where a perceived threat requires swift action, but the methods employed must align with the Philadelphia Police Department's PPD established policies and the legal framework governing police conduct in Pennsylvania. The need for rapid response must be balanced against the potential for overreach or the violation of constitutional protections, demanding careful judgment and a thorough understanding of PPD directives. The best approach involves Officer Miller immediately securing the scene and requesting backup, while simultaneously initiating a lawful stop and frisk based on reasonable suspicion. This approach is correct because it prioritizes officer and public safety by isolating the potential threat and bringing additional resources to bear. Crucially, it grounds the subsequent investigative actions in a legally recognized standard reasonable suspicion, which is the threshold required by Pennsylvania law and PPD policy for a lawful stop and frisk. This ensures that any search or detention is justified and not arbitrary, thereby respecting the individual's rights while still allowing for necessary investigative steps. An incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to immediately detain the individual without articulating any specific, articulable facts to support a reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. This fails to meet the legal standard for a lawful stop and frisk, potentially leading to a violation of the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, and also contravening PPD policy that mandates reasonable suspicion for such actions. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct a full search of the individual's person or belongings without probable cause, which goes beyond the scope of a lawful frisk and is a clear violation of constitutional protections and departmental policy. Finally, ignoring the situation and proceeding without any investigative action, despite observing suspicious behavior, would be professionally negligent and could compromise public safety, failing to uphold the PPD's duty to investigate potential criminal activity. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with an objective assessment of the situation, identifying specific, articulable facts that suggest criminal activity. This assessment must then be weighed against established legal standards and departmental policies. If reasonable suspicion exists, officers should proceed with a lawful stop and frisk, ensuring the scope of the action is limited to what is necessary to discover weapons. If probable cause develops, further investigative steps, including a more thorough search, may be warranted. Throughout the process, clear communication with dispatch and responding officers is paramount, and all actions must be documented accurately. Question 16. Operational review demonstrates that a Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officer observes an individual loitering in a high-crime area known for drug activity. The individual appears visibly anxious and glances repeatedly at the officer. The officer has no other specific information about this individual or any ongoing criminal activity. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take regarding a potential search of the individual? Option A. Detain the individual for questioning, and if they refuse to answer questions, proceed with a search based on their uncooperative behavior. Option B. Conduct a search based on the officer's intuition that the individual might be involved in criminal activity, as officers often develop a gut feeling in such situations. Option C. Initiate a search of the individual immediately, given the high crime area and the individual's nervous demeanor, as these factors suggest potential criminal involvement. Option D. Assess the totality of the circumstances, looking for specific, articulable facts that, when combined, would lead a reasonable person to believe that criminal activity is afoot, and that the individual may possess evidence of that activity, before considering a search. The correct answer is D. Assess the totality of the circumstances, looking for specific, articulable facts that, when combined, would lead a reasonable person to believe that criminal activity is afoot, and that the individual may possess evidence of that activity, before considering a search. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between immediate public safety concerns and the procedural rights of an individual. An officer must balance the urgency of a potential threat with the legal and ethical obligations to conduct a search and seizure in a manner that respects constitutional protections. Misjudging the situation could lead to an unlawful search, compromising evidence, violating civil liberties, and facing disciplinary action or legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the totality of the circumstances to establish probable cause before initiating a search. This approach requires the officer to articulate specific, objective facts that would lead a reasonable person to believe that a crime has been committed or that evidence of a crime will be found in the location to be searched. In Philadelphia, this aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by Pennsylvania courts, which mandates that searches and seizures be reasonable and generally require a warrant based on probable cause, unless a well-established exception applies. The officer must be able to articulate these facts to justify the intrusion. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating a search based solely on a hunch or a vague, uncorroborated tip without further investigation or independent corroboration is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach violates the probable cause requirement, as it lacks the specific, articulable facts necessary to justify a search under the Fourth Amendment. Such an action could lead to the suppression of any evidence found and potential civil liability for the officer and the department. Conducting a search based on the individual's nervous demeanor alone, without any other objective indicators of criminal activity, is also professionally unacceptable. While nervousness can be a factor in an officer's assessment, it is not, by itself, sufficient to establish probable cause for a search. Relying solely on subjective interpretation of behavior bypasses the requirement for objective, factual justification and infringes upon an individual's right to privacy. Stopping the individual and questioning them without any reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, and then proceeding to search them based on their refusal to answer questions, is another failure. Reasonable suspicion is a lower standard than probable cause and is required for a brief investigatory stop, Terry stop, but it does not automatically grant the right to search. A refusal to answer questions, in the absence of other suspicious factors, does not constitute probable cause for a search. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves 1. Observing and gathering objective facts. 2. Assessing those facts against established legal standards, reasonable suspicion for a stop, probable cause for a search. 3. Consulting with supervisors or legal advisors when uncertain. And 4. Documenting all actions and justifications meticulously. The guiding principle is to act with integrity, respect for individual rights, and adherence to the law, ensuring that all actions are justifiable and defensible. Question 17. Implementation of the Philadelphia Police Department's PPD policy on warrantless entries into private residences, when faced with a report of a domestic disturbance, requires officers to make a rapid and legally sound judgment. If an officer receives a report of loud shouting and what sounds like a physical altercation from within a residence, but has no direct observation of violence and no information suggesting immediate danger to life or imminent destruction of evidence. What is the most appropriate course of action according to PPD guidelines and constitutional principles? Option A. Wait outside the residence for a period of time to see if the situation escalates, without attempting any initial contact or assessment. Option B. Immediately enter the residence to investigate the disturbance, prioritizing the potential for violence over the need for a warrant. Option C. Knock and announce their presence, request to speak with the occupants, and assess the situation further based on their direct observations and the occupants' responses to determine if exigent circumstances justify entry. Option D. Enter the residence based on the report alone, assuming a crime is in progress and that occupants would consent to a search if asked. Correct answer is C. Knock and announce their presence, request to speak with the occupants, and assess the situation further based on their direct observations and the occupants' responses to determine if exigent circumstances justify entry. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officers, balancing the need for swift action with the imperative to uphold constitutional rights and departmental policy. The professional challenge lies in accurately assessing the exigent circumstances, ensuring that any intrusion into a private residence is justified and limited to the immediate threat, and documenting the justification meticulously. Failure to do so can lead to the suppression of evidence, civil liability, and disciplinary action. The best approach involves a thorough, on-the-spot assessment of the totality of circumstances to determine if probable cause exists for an arrest or search, and if exigent circumstances, such as immediate danger to life, risk of evidence destruction, or flight of a suspect, justify a warrantless entry. This approach prioritizes constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, while allowing for necessary police intervention in genuine emergencies. Specifically, PPD officers are guided by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and departmental policies that mirror its protections, requiring probable cause and, generally, a warrant for entry into a home. However, exceptions like exigent circumstances are recognized when immediate action is necessary to prevent harm or loss of evidence. This approach ensures that any deviation from the warrant requirement is strictly limited to the scope and duration necessary to address the immediate exigency. An approach that involves entering a residence solely based on a neighbor's unsubstantiated report of a disturbance, without further independent corroboration or clear evidence of an immediate threat to life or destruction of evidence, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the probable cause standard required for a lawful entry and disregards the constitutional protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The PPD policy, like general constitutional law, requires more than mere suspicion or a generalized concern for order. It demands specific, articulable facts that would lead a reasonable officer to believe that crime is in progress or that someone is in immediate danger. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to delay entry to obtain a warrant when the reported circumstances clearly indicate an ongoing, life-threatening emergency or imminent destruction of critical evidence. While warrants are preferred, the doctrine of exigent circumstances exists precisely for situations where obtaining a warrant is impracticable and would allow the harm to occur. Delay in such a scenario would be a dereliction of duty and could have tragic consequences. Finally, entering a residence to investigate a minor noise complaint without any indication of violence or criminal activity, and then conducting a search beyond the scope of the initial justification, is also unacceptable. This constitutes an unlawful search and seizure, violating both constitutional rights and PPD policy. The scope of any lawful entry under exigent circumstances must be narrowly tailored to address the specific exigency that justified the entry. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the legal standards, Fourth Amendment, PPD policy, and the specific facts presented. They must then assess whether probable cause exists, and if so, whether exigent circumstances justify bypassing the warrant requirement. This assessment must be objective, based on articulable facts, and focused on the immediate threat. Documentation of the justification for any warrantless entry is paramount. Question 18. To address the challenge of balancing public transparency with operational integrity during an active investigation in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, An officer encounters a citizen recording the scene from a public sidewalk. The citizen's proximity and movement are beginning to distract officers and potentially compromise the integrity of the scene. Which of the following represents the most appropriate professional response? Option A. Immediately order the citizen to cease all recording and move away from the area without providing any explanation. Option B. Allow the citizen to continue recording without intervention, regardless of their proximity or potential interference with the investigation. Option C. Calmly explain to the citizen the specific ways their current actions are interfering with the investigation and creating a safety concern, and request they adjust their position or behavior accordingly. Option D. Engage in a detailed discussion with the citizen about their constitutional rights to record police activity. The correct answer is C. Calmly explain to the citizen the specific ways their current actions are interfering with the investigation and creating a safety concern, and request they adjust their position or behavior accordingly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a citizen's perceived right to record and a police officer's duty to maintain order and safety during an investigation. The officer must balance the public's right to observe and record police activity with the need to conduct an effective and secure investigation, all while adhering to Pennsylvania law and PPD policy. Misjudging this balance can lead to legal challenges, public distrust, and compromised investigations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves acknowledging the citizen's right to record, while clearly and calmly explaining the specific, articulable reasons why their current actions are interfering with the investigation and posing a safety risk. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and education, informing the individual about the boundaries of their recording rights in a specific operational context. It aligns with the Pennsylvania Wiretapping and Electronic Surveillance Control Act, which generally permits recording in public spaces where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy, but also recognizes that such recording cannot impede lawful police operations or create a safety hazard. The PPD's internal policies likely emphasize balancing transparency with operational integrity. By explaining the specific interference, e.g., proximity, obstruction, distraction, the officer educates the citizen and provides a basis for a lawful request to move or cease certain actions, rather than issuing a blanket prohibition. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately order the citizen to stop recording without any explanation or justification. This fails to acknowledge the citizen's right to record in a public space and can be perceived as an arbitrary restriction of lawful activity, potentially violating First Amendment rights and PPD policy regarding citizen interactions. It escalates the situation unnecessarily and bypasses opportunities for de-escalation and education. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the citizen's recording and allow them to continue their actions even if they are demonstrably interfering with the investigation or creating a safety hazard. This approach neglects the officer's duty to maintain scene integrity and public safety. While citizens have a right to record, this right is not absolute and does not extend to actions that actively obstruct or endanger a lawful police operation. This could lead to compromised evidence or officer/public injury. A third incorrect approach is to engage in a lengthy debate or argument with the citizen about their right to record. While communication is important, officers are trained to manage dynamic situations efficiently. Prolonged arguments can draw more attention, further disrupt the scene, and detract from the primary investigative task. It also risks the officer losing control of the interaction and potentially making statements that could be misconstrued or used against them. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to citizen interactions during investigations. First, assess the situation for immediate threats to safety. Second, identify any potential interference with the investigation. Third, if interference or safety concerns exist, calmly and clearly communicate the specific issue to the individual, referencing relevant legal principles or departmental policy if appropriate. Fourth, request specific actions to mitigate the issue, e.g., please step back to the sidewalk to avoid obstructing the scene. Fifth, if the individual complies, thank them and continue the investigation. If the individual refuses to comply with a lawful order that is necessary for safety or to prevent obstruction, then further enforcement action may be warranted. But this should be a last resort after all de-escalation and educational attempts have failed. Question 19. Examination of the data shows that a Philadelphia Police Department, PPD officer, while on routine patrol in a residential neighborhood, observes through an open window what appears to be illegal narcotics in plain view on a table inside a private residence. The resident is present inside the home. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take in this situation, adhering strictly to Pennsylvania law and PPD guidelines? Option A. Immediately enter the residence to seize the suspected narcotics and detain the resident, as the contraband is in plain view. Option B. Detain the resident outside the residence and wait for backup, but do not attempt to secure the residence or investigate further without direct orders. Option C. Secure the exterior of the residence to prevent the destruction of evidence and immediately contact a supervisor to request assistance and initiate the process for obtaining a search warrant. Option D. Knock on the door and ask the resident for permission to enter and search the residence, without informing them of their right to refuse consent. The correct answer is C. Secure the exterior of the residence to prevent the destruction of evidence and immediately contact a supervisor to request assistance and initiate the process for obtaining a search warrant. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officer due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action in a potential emergency and the requirement to adhere to established departmental procedures and legal statutes governing search and seizure. The officer must balance the immediate perceived threat with the constitutional rights of the individual. Misjudgment can lead to the suppression of crucial evidence, internal disciplinary action, or civil liability. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and immediately requesting a supervisor and the appropriate specialized unit e.g., narcotics or vice, to assess the situation and obtain a warrant if probable cause is established. This approach is correct because it respects the Fourth Amendment rights of individuals against unreasonable searches and seizures, as interpreted by Pennsylvania law and U.S. Supreme Court precedent. The PPD's internal policies and training emphasize the importance of obtaining warrants based on probable cause, especially when dealing with suspected contraband in a private residence. This method ensures that any subsequent search is legally sound and that evidence obtained is admissible in court, thereby upholding the integrity of the investigation and the justice system. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately enter the residence and conduct a full search based solely on the officer's suspicion and the visible contraband in plain view from the exterior. This fails to acknowledge that while plain view can justify seizure of contraband, it does not automatically grant the right to enter a private dwelling without a warrant or a recognized exception to the warrant requirement. The officer's suspicion, while potentially valid, may not rise to the level of probable cause required for a warrantless entry into a home. Another incorrect approach is to detain the individual outside the residence, but refrain from any further action or investigation, assuming the situation does not warrant intervention. This is professionally unacceptable, as it neglects the officer's duty to investigate potential criminal activity when there is reasonable suspicion or probable cause. While avoiding illegal searches is paramount, abandoning a potentially significant investigation without proper assessment and documentation would be a dereliction of duty. A third incorrect approach involves attempting to coerce the resident into consenting to a search without informing them of their right to refuse. This is ethically and legally flawed. Consent must be voluntary and informed. Any consent obtained under duress or without full disclosure of rights is invalid and would render any evidence found inadmissible. This violates fundamental principles of due process and individual liberty. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves a systematic assessment of the situation, identifying the nature of the suspected offense, evaluating the level of suspicion or probable cause, and considering applicable legal exceptions to the warrant requirement. When in doubt, the safest and most legally sound course of action is to preserve the status quo, secure the scene if necessary, and consult with supervisors and legal counsel to ensure all actions are compliant with the law and PPD policy. This methodical approach minimizes risk and maximizes the likelihood of a successful and legally defensible investigation. Question 20. Research into the Philadelphia Police Department's PPD General Order 3.12 regarding overtime compensation and Pennsylvania labor law indicates that officers are entitled to 1. 5 times their base hourly rate for hours worked beyond a standard 40-hour work week. Officer Miller, whose base hourly rate is $30,000, worked 48 hours in a given week. If his supervisor mistakenly calculates his overtime pay based on a simple hourly rate for all hours worked beyond 40, what is the difference between the correct overtime pay and the supervisor's incorrect calculation? Option A. Officer Miller should receive $300,000 in overtime pay, and the supervisor's calculation would be $240,000, resulting in a difference of $60,000. Option B. Officer Miller should receive $240,000 in overtime pay, and the supervisor's calculation would be $180,000, resulting in a difference of $60,000. Option C. Officer Miller should receive $360,000 in overtime pay, and the supervisor's calculation would be $300,000, resulting in a difference of $60,000. Option D. Officer Miller should receive $360,000 in overtime pay, and the supervisor's calculation would be $240,000, resulting in a difference of $120,000. The correct answer is D. Officer Miller should receive $360,000 in overtime pay, and the supervisor's calculation would be $240,000, resulting in a difference of $120,000. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Philadelphia Police Department, PPD, officers involving the accurate calculation of overtime pay, which directly impacts officer compensation and departmental budget management. Ensuring fairness to officers while adhering to PPD's internal policies and Pennsylvania labor laws is paramount. Errors in calculation can lead to grievances, underpayment or overpayment of officers, and potential legal disputes, all of which undermine trust and operational efficiency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously tracking all overtime hours worked, cross-referencing with official duty logs and supervisor approvals, and then applying the PPD's established overtime rate calculation formula. This formula, as per PPD General Order 3/12, dictates that overtime is paid at 5 times the officer's base hourly rate for hours worked beyond their standard 40-hour work week. The calculation for Officer Miller's overtime would be total overtime hours equals 48 hours worked, 40 hours standard, equals 8 hours. Officer Miller's base hourly rate equals $30,000/hour overtime rate equals 5 asterisk $30,000/hour equals $45,000/hour. Total overtime pay equals 8 hours asterisk $45,000/hour equals $360,000. This approach is correct because it strictly adheres to the PPD's documented policy on overtime compensation and Pennsylvania labor law, ensuring accurate and equitable payment for services rendered. It prioritizes transparency and verifiable data. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply estimate the overtime hours based on general observation or a rough recollection. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for accurate record-keeping and precise calculation of wages. It opens the door to significant under- or overpayment, violating PPD policy and potentially Pennsylvania wage laws, which mandate accurate compensation for all hours worked. Another incorrect approach is to apply a flat rate for all overtime hours without considering the 1/5 multiplier mandated by PPD policy. This would result in underpayment of officers, as it does not account for the premium rate established for work exceeding the standard work week. This directly contravenes PPD General Order 3/12 and is a clear violation of labor regulations. A third incorrect approach is to use a different overtime calculation method not specified by PPD policy, such as using the officer's average hourly rate across all shifts, including any special duty pay. While seemingly an attempt at fairness, it deviates from the established and legally compliant formula, leading to inaccurate calculations and potential disputes. PPD policy is specific about the base hourly rate for overtime calculation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to overtime calculation. This involves 1. Understanding and strictly adhering to departmental policies and relevant state labor laws regarding overtime. 2. Maintaining accurate and detailed records of all hours worked, including start and end times, and obtaining necessary supervisor approvals. 3. Utilizing the precise formula provided by the department for calculating overtime pay. 4. Verifying calculations independently or through a designated payroll process before submitting for payment. 5. Being prepared to explain the calculation process if questioned, demonstrating transparency and accountability.